Just make sure.
Is there on this side?
Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Good evening. We just were having some technical issues, but we're happy to start the meeting. We're just giving a few minutes for one participant, but in regards to that, I think we would like to start the meeting now. Thanks for everyone who has joined. So,
Joy, you're muted.
No, this is
I think there's
someone
someone
says-
who's,
Okay.
yes. Perfect. So we can start the meeting. So thank you everyone for joining this learning session on Green Cities, Healthy Lives. This is a learning session that is organized as part of Urban October. We have a set of speakers that are going to speak around the topic of green cities and healthy lives. As the session today has been organized as part of Urban October, we'd like to remind everyone that Urban October is a month that different community members, cities, as well as organizations come together to focus on different topics when it comes to how it impacts our urban future. This year, we're excited to explore how youth particularly shape sustainable urban futures. And with this session, we are particularly going to focus on biodiversity and urban health. Recently, UN Habitat Assembly adopted a biodiversity resolution, which identified biodiversity as a key priority to creating resilient and thriving urban spaces. So we'll get into the details of that with the first keynote speaker. And then we will be delving deep into how this nexus between biodiversity, urban health, and how young people are shaping and leading these initiatives in restoring ecosystem, but also enhancing urban health outcomes. Just to introduce, apologies. Just to introduce, I'm Joy Mutai, and I'll be your moderator for this session. We have exceptional lineup, I would say, of speakers. They are highly knowledgeable and experienced in the field that they are working on, and we're looking forward to seeing some, insights and how we can learn around these three nexus on youth, biodiversity, and urban health. So the agenda for today is set out into three main parts. So the first part is really around keynote presentation, both looking at the broader biodiversity and urban areas, but also looking at the role of UN Habitat in this space. And then we are going to have a keynote presentation as well around youth and youth initiatives in biodiversity. And then the second segment will focus particularly on the linkage between biodiversity and health with two additional speakers. We are going to leave the final part of this session to a panel discussion. And with the panel discussion, we are hoping that participants will engage with questions and with questions. We will be prioritizing the questions from the floor, so please feel free to ask the questions as the presenters are making their remarks. Just to give you a little bit of some housekeeping rules, just to inform everyone that this session is being recorded and will be shared later, especially if you would like to review the content again, or you would like to share with other colleagues who have not been part of this live. We are also requesting, and we've already seen these technical issues, for everyone to please mute their mics so that we can reduce the background noise and ensure that everyone can hear all the speakers well. We'd like to encourage everyone to interact. As I've mentioned, please feel free to write your questions, your comments. You can also target specific speakers in your questions or your remarks, and we will get into that in the Q&A session. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the first keynote speaker, Mr. Andrew Rudd. Andrew will present around biodiversity and the role of from the UN Habitat's perspective. He has a background in urban planning, public space, project management, as well as a particular expertise in concept development, policy formulation, advocacy, as well as political negotiation. especially in sustainable cities. So without further ado, over to you, Andrew.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Joy. Am I coming in loud and clear on your end?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thanks. This is an amazing crowd you've assembled. Really excited to be here. I have to start by saying it's a little ironic that I'm here for an event on health. I had just gotten over dysentery of all things to go on a work trip and come back with a cold. So you'll have to put up with my clogged voice. Apologies for that. Let me start by sharing my screen. Here we go. Coming through clearly?
Yes, very clear. We can see your presentation.
Excellent. So this is a very, very intersecting space, excitingly so, that and ambitious that you've chosen to take it on for today's brown bag. I know I'll just jump in and say I'm clearly not a health expert. The One Health kind of constellation of partners have conceptualized this in some helpful and interesting ways, not least of which through Venn diagramming, exploded Venn diagramming, trying to get at how we can not just conceptualize, but act in this area. For us, though, as planners, designers, and built environment professionals, as many of us, not just within Habitat, but within our kind of wider professional constellation are, I think it's really helpful to go back to the foundational definition of biodiversity, which is really a scalar one. And that's how I'm going to try and slice through this in 15 minutes. 3 different ideas or conceptions of scale. Firstly, how to think of this in terms of scales of organization, how to think of the biodiversity, urban health, youth nexus in terms of scales of space, and then scales of time. And let's see if that catalyzes or stymies conversation. You'll let me know. But contrary to, I think, most popular conception, biodiversity is not just about endangered species. It's not just about the iconic. It's about mundane and invisible species and processes. It really runs the entire gamut. This is from Conservation International. From genes, which you see here at the top, all the way through this spectrum to the entire biosphere of the planet. Each of these kind of moments in this logarithmic scale has profound implications for health. Habitat is not dealing with all of these, but I think it bears mentioning that even at the smallest, the genetic level, there is currently a fierce battle being fought over who has rights to genetic material, who has rights to seeds. This is the fight over genetic modification, and it has great, quite dire implications for who in the world has access to good food, who has the right to grow food, and therefore to nutritious and healthy lives. That's just at the genetic scale. Moving sort of one down to the species scale, lot of very interesting work in some of the world's toughest environments, looking for as yet undiscovered species, bacterial species, in caves, in deep water undersea. A lot of hope for curing as yet uncurable bacterial infections are to be found in as yet undiscovered antibiotics in such spaces with undiscovered bacteria, etc. Moving one scale down to sites, I think this nexus at the site and the ecosystem scale and human health really came to the fore at the start of the pandemic, when there were discussions catalyzed around zoonotic diseases and how encroachment on natural habitats by human uses was bringing species with whom we otherwise had very little contact, very much into contact, not just with us, but with intermediary species. So just to give a flavor of how even at all of these scales, even the ones where we as practitioners and policymakers may not be working, there are clear implications for health. Just last year, we had the privilege to work with a consortium of partners funded by Google. This was with Nature Conservancy on a study for a new journal, People and Nature. It produced new evidence, and I'm sure none of this is new to any of you, but you see sort of top center, the results of a study showing how increases in vegetation cover very clearly correlates with a reduction in depression of the population residing within the areas of higher vegetation cover. Looking at what that meant for urban form, you see it upper right. But the corollary, if I can call it a corollary, probably not quite the right word, but you see it at bottom center. The trade-offs involved in pursuing more compact walkable cities, which are essential for averting irreversible climate change, are that the denser a city gets, the harder it is to provide vegetative cover and green space, and therefore a lot of trade-offs we need to articulate. One bright spot you see at the bottom right, while clearly, and you see this downward curve again, correlating to the gray dots. With density, open space decreases, but then the bright spot of the kind of upward arc correlating to the green dots. Sorry, I don't have a pointer. You can follow my hopefully verbal cues again at lower right. And this shows that as places become more dense, protected areas actually also increase for a while. So the tendency for urban areas as nature becomes scarcer to be valued more, and therefore to be conferred some kind of protective distinction. So another study Habitat did a few years ago on 50 or so let's just say green urban projects, whether they were parks, strategies, plans, etc., was looking at the sum total of all the ecosystem services, whether they're provisioning or regulating or supporting or cultural. I'm hoping everyone's familiar with those broad categories. There was a hell of a lot more happening beneath the surface that no one knew about. So whereas we found most of these 50 cities were investing in parks and the like for common motivations like recreational space, floodwater capture, etc., triple the kind of co-benefits were being delivered for free without anyone knowing. And you see the four most common, what we called serendipitous ecosystem services in the red dots at the upper left. So pollination, carbon storage, organic matter accumulation, and recycling of nutrients. And what struck us is how critical these hidden ecosystem co-benefits are for so many global threats facing us, including food insecurity. The idea being if city decision makers, planners, mayors, etc., knew the full benefit and value of what nature is providing for people, that there would be much more incentive to invest in this in future. And so it became a goal, one of our goals, to get some of this information out there. So that was looking at this through scales of organization, right? From the gene to the entire ecosystem. We want to look now at scales of space. And I think this really is helpful in conceptualizing. This is actually kind of borrowed from our urban forestry colleagues. When I first started, it just immediately clicked for me in terms of what we're doing as built environment professionals, at least a lot of us. Thinking of our scale of influence kind of telescopically, in terms of the local, what's happening around our bodies, right? On our urban blocks, streets, and our neighborhoods and communities. Stepping up, what's happening nearby at the edge, beyond our cities, settlements, communities, homes, and the furthest, the excuse me, the scale of the far. So this is about global telecoupling. So what's the impact of what we're consuming? How is it being produced? And how is our waste being transported through long kind of telecoupled channels? I'm going to start then with the near. I think Habitat has been doing a lot of really promising work within cities, bringing in new green spaces. One example being, Joy, your very own public space program, citywide public space assessment toolkit. Probably no need for me to introduce this further, but as I always say, it's really the preeminent spatial asset inventory, to my mind. Gets students out there, mobilizes communities, geolocates spaces for cities that may not have that inventory. And then with the qualitative questionnaire begins to answer questions about ownership, occupation, perceptions. And now we're really happy to be working with public space on a biodiversity layer. At the far side of the spectrum, so if we've looked first at the local and the center, and now we're moving right to the end, the far, these are the global impact of supply chains, of very hidden production and consumption patterns, often large-scale deforestation for plantations, for agriculture, that produce products that may be then shipped to point B for processing, and then point C for consumption, and perhaps back to a point D for disposal. Not a very sustainable production and consumption chain. We have an urban-rural linkages team under policy, legislation, and governance section in Habitat that's been working at the moment in a slightly more conceptual way at the impact of in situ and ex situ approaches to flows of materials.
Andrew,
and what this means. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You have less than 5 minutes.
Moving on. I'm going to focus now on the near. This is the edge. Another study we did showed land use change due to urban expansion is the most significant driver of habitat loss in the world. As of 2012, more than half of what's expected to be cities were due to be built. This implied a doubling, with dire implications for biodiversity. Most cities in the world in biodiversity hotspots expanding in direct conflict with them. A lot of it because of replication of 20th century patterns of sprawl and segregation. We're seeing this now the world over. Fortunately, UN is doing its best to get to grips with this. We have a common approach to biodiversity that includes looking at improving quality of urbanization, limiting encroachment. We have a Singapore index that's helping cities measure baselines and track what's happening with biodiversity. But we discovered a gap, and this is where I moved to the third scale, scales of time, looking at this whole sort of spectrum, of creation through restoration and conservation to preservation. Proactive approaches to biodiversity that's not yet been destroyed are very, very few in this world. That's the gap we're seeking in red here to fill. In other words, to be able to predict, and you see here, this is work we're doing with the University of Pennsylvania in peri-urban Sao Paulo, in red areas under threat. High intactness of biodiversity, very high likelihood of development, urgent proactive preservation oriented planning needed now. The biodiversity plan gives us 2 targets relating to this, one more on health, target 11, one more on green spaces in cities, target 12. Here you see this kind of conceptual logic. I'm going to move on. We had a white paper 2 years ago on the topic, and then, as Joy mentioned, last year, very pleased to have a resolution, our first, dedicated to biodiverse and resilient cities. It mandates us to produce a toolkit. So what we're trying to do is to project where spatial growth is going to happen, where that's going to conflict with intact biodiversity, how we can prioritize where cities intervene first, and then ultimately prevent. What we've put together is a risk index map, and we've ultimately produced what we're calling a stoplight. This is in San Jose, trying to fill that gap at that proactive preservation scale, how to get ahead of what's about to be destroyed before it's lost. And so you see at the edges in red areas at that high risk, that intersection of intactness and likely development, because due to proximity to roads, etc., working with the cities to devise trade-offs. So the red light says, don't develop here. The yellow says, consider with caution where we might expand. And the green says, relatively low biodiversity value, great spots for infill, densification, etc. And then here focusing on municipalities of highest projected risk. I'm going to end with this. This is where I probably picked up my cold on Friday. I was at an Urban Thinkers campus in Birmingham, UK. Fascinating topic of an international landscape convention. This is something that Joy is working very heavily on as well with International Federation of Landscape Architects. What really charmed me about this is that this meeting adopted as its kind of mantra something from the West Midlands National Park in the UK near Birmingham, which states that, and this is my pivot to youth, every child should be able to see the stars at night, to hear bird song, see trees, sunrises and sets, pollination, walk, cycle and run safely, breathe clean air, and access good quality local food, etc. So I put a bit of, how to say, cold water, I suppose, on the ambitions of the group and said, a convention will be tough. At this stage, appetite for multilateralism is low, to put it mildly. But we are making strides, I think, at a kind of national and municipal scale on prevention, all the things I've mentioned in the last 10 minutes. But what we're really lacking at the end and need to work on, I think, is this idea of stewardship. And no better populations to enlist in that than youth themselves. And I think this underscores the extent to which biodiversity and health is fundamentally an experiential thing. This is about exposure, it's about habits, it's about installation of memories, construction of identities. If we can get youth involved early on now, before all of this is lost, that we're not playing catch up, trying to fix and put plasters on the mistakes we've made. So I will end with that, Joy, and pass back to you. I'm sure if there are any questions, they can come later. Thanks so much, and thanks for bearing with my voice. Cheers.
Thank you, Andrew. And we do hope that you will feel better soon. I think that was a great ending also to the next keynote speaker, especially in regards to how young people are, championing biodiversity. Just want to say your thoughts on space and time in terms of how we can look at biodiversity at different scales, but also in terms of time and make decisions to, prioritize biodiversity in urban development. So thank you very much, Andrew. We are going to get back to you at the end during the panel with two very interesting questions. We have the next speaker, Ms. Ishadi Mendes. Ms. Ishadi Mendes is a National Geographic explorer from Sri Lanka. She is an engineer and an environmental advocate and also a scuba diver. She represents Asia Youth on the steering committee of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, as well as the official youth constituency of the United Nations Conventions on Biodiversity. Ms. Ishadi will be talking about why youth matter in terms of public space. So over to you, Ms. Ishadi.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joy, for that introduction. And I think Andrew took a really, the ending, it caught my eye that see the stars of the every child must be able to see the stars of the child of the sky. So let's start with that. So I hope to speak about the role of the youth to promote the biodiversity, to improve urban health, and how youth have been working on this platforms, and also what are the projects. I will give few examples on some projects and what can we do for the future to make this happen together. Next. So why youth and biodiversity matter? So we talk about this youth engagement, youth participation, why youth matters and all, but actually, uh, so why does it matter? Because our future depends on this healthy planet. We and as youth, we have a lot of new ideas, fresh ideas. Like, I mean, so we are the future of this planet, and also it's our responsibility to save this planet for the future generation. As Andrew said, it is our responsibility to keep this planet for the children, and they must be able to see the stars of the sky without air pollution and all. And also, we are in a stage that the climate change is our reality. So it's an urgent need to make sure that we understand that we are at a tipping point, and it's our responsibility to reflect on our actions and see how we can make a change. And also, I believe that youth care about just an sustainable world. So it is, and also we have the power to make a difference in this world. Next, please. Okay. So how global youth bio as you global youth biodiversity network as the main coordination platform of the convention on the as the main youth coordination platform of the convention on the biological diversity, we have been trying to save biodiversity for over a decade. So youth, we have 53 national chapters in the world, and we have 1.25 million members who are working on ground level. But not only ground level, we also make interventions in CBD platforms. We go to COPs, and we in our at national levels also. We make a difference by trying to intervene to the governments on the national biodiversity strategic action plans and all, to make sure how can youth voices be amplified in the policy arenas and everything. And also in the ground levels, we have young people who live in cities and who live in villages. So specifically on cities. So we as young people, we try to make sure that the youth understand this by through doing capacity building activities. You can see in these pictures. Yeah, I mean, these are just very few pictures that I have shared with you, how youth have been working towards to protect, safeguard the biodiversity. So one picture could be from Cambodia, a workshop from Cambodia, how we did this a workshop on the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan and the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And one picture is from how do we do the interventions in the CBD space as the polity interventions. Next. Next, please. And Joy.
There's a bit of delay from our side.
It's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is one of the examples that I have from Sri Lanka. This is from my independent project supported by the National Geographic Society. This is called Schoolyard Scientist. So this specifically addresses the schoolyards and how and to improve the well-being of children, to build the empathy of children towards nature. So I personally believe that that we all know the issue. We all know that climate change is a reality. We know that the biodiversity is at risk. But do we feel that? Do we feel to our hearts that that this issue is real? So I believe that, so we believe, we as Global Youth Biodiversity Network, also as young people, we believe that the empathy should be built in children and also young people, to make sure that the biodiversity is safe, and we address the climate change issues in the long run. So in this project, what we do is that we have children and young educators from around the country, and we take them to the forest reserves and national parks, and also we let them be with nature so that they understand nature, and also they survey the biodiversity of their own schoolyards. And a few of few of the pictures that you see in the screen are that after learning from this. So it's been about 6 months that since we started this project. So now that they do bioblitzers in their schoolyards, and they now only they understand that there are this much of species in these schoolyards that they have never even saw. And also another point is that when we take them to the Hidden Plains National Park in Sri Lanka, we let them draw the chimney pool of Hidden Plains. It's a really beautiful scenery, and the children loved it. Not only children, we also have young educators who are below 35 in this project, who are also from the schools that we selected from, we selected the children from. And also so it makes their empathy towards nature, and also even though they live in the cities, they understand that the biodiversity is important, and they now notice that there are these beautiful species in their backyards and in their schoolyards. So one of the pictures are also that they keep journals, and it's really beautiful how we can make an impact on children and young people through these kind of projects. Next. So, and also the youth has a role not only in the ground level, but also we have a role in the advocacy level. As I said in the beginning, also that shaping the national and local biodiversity plans. So in Gibbon, we have our chapters. We go for the consultations that uh, the governments are having, and we get invitations. So we call the Minister of Environments to tell them that please invite us to join so that we can give our opinions. So in Sri Lanka also, tomorrow is also there's an ministry meeting on to set the set the indicators for the national targets of the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan. And also not only in Sri Lanka, in almost all the countries, our Gibbon chapters are trying to make an impact on the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan. So in this COP, the coming COP, which is happening in Colombia, one of the main focuses are on the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plans or the national targets, whatever the input that the governments are providing. So it's our responsibility to provide our input on the national biodiversity NBSAPs, and also in order to do that, we also do youth consultations. So recently, during the last weekend in Sri Lanka, we did a youth consultation for young people to understand what youth want, to save the biodiversity, to conserve biodiversity. So through these initiations, we are able to we are able to make an impact on the national level, on the international level also, to make sure that our cities are protected, that our the youth are protected, the biodiversity is protected. Next. So this is another very nice example. I would say that we were was able to join with AI PH and make a new edition for the 2024 Cities Award, Green Cities Award. And this time in this award, we had a youth award as well. So this is a new edition which was adopted which was announced in when we were in COP15 in Canada. And after that, so last year and last year, and we were getting ready, and this year we got ready, and this year we selected these three countries, we gave awards for these three cities. One city was from Australia, and another two cities are from Australia, and another city is from Brazil. So in this youth award, what we did was we made sure we tried to identify what are the cities that has had a kind of a recognition for young people, has been responsive for young people's health, mental health, well-being, and also how they have been, whether the young people's decisions are considered, whether they were able to uh, make sure that youth are part of these cities as well. So it was one of the very good examples how youth can participate, how youth can make an impact in these spaces. Next.
Sorry, Ishadi, you have less than 3 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Next. So as I said, why is this urgent? Why addressing the health of the cities, I mean, the biodiversity in the cities are important is because the ecosystems are in the edge, as you know, it's in the tipping point, and also the health impacts that we cannot ignore, that the nowadays the depression and everything. The nature is really important. Sorry.
It's definitely not for the shed owner.
Sorry about that, Ishadi. Please go ahead.
I think
She's muted now. Please unmute from your side, Ishadi.
Oh,
Yes.
was it muted? Okay. Did you hear what I said in this slide, or is it fine? Okay.
Yes, I
Sure.
think we lost only the last second or two. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So what I was saying is that it's important that we address this very urgently. Otherwise, if we lose our biodiversity in the cities, it's gonna make a huge impact on the mental health of of people, of young people. So even nowadays, we see that the mental health of young people is not that is not that good as compared to the previous traditional ages. So it's really important that we make our cities biodiversity. When we create our cities, we care about the biodiversity as well. And also it's our responsibility to save these spaces for our future generation. Next. So what can we do? What can we do to make this happen? I think throughout this presentation, I've been slightly touching upon this as well. So one thing we can do is we can we can make that our home spaces. We can make our rooftops into some roof gardens, and there are plenty of things that we can do to transform our urban spaces into spaces with nature, spaces which are beautiful, which we can go and have some fresh time in the nature. And also, as I said, we can be a voice for the change. And also, we can use our creativity, art, storytelling, and all to make sure that people are aware of this. So I invite everyone to join with us. And also, I invite all the young people to think about themselves, think about, reflect themselves, and reflect on what can we do, what can I do to make sure that we make our cities a biodiversity conserved. So also we can work together towards this, towards conserving our biodiversity. And also we are tech savvy people, so we are the future generation. We are young people. We are very technologically advanced people, I would say. So let's try to find solutions. We can create apps uh, to measure the health of our urban spaces, like that. Next. So this picture is very important. I will wind up with this, just giving a brief on this picture. So this was created in one of the UN, during one of the CBD meetings, and it reflects that system-wide change. We need to be transformative, and also stop the same happening. And it's we youth can make that happen. Thank you. Over to you, Joy.
Thanks, Ishadi. Thanks very much. I know everyone in the room feels like they would like to clap, so hopefully everyone within the session are also clapping. I think that was fantastic to hear the work from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network and how you're championing, biodiversity and ensuring young people are engaged throughout the process, at very many scales, actually, at the global scale, at national scales, but also seeing the tools and the projects that you're undertaking. I really liked to see the schoolyard scientist project, and everyone believes they are scientists, and that's what changes generations in terms of biodiversity. So I'd like us to move to the next session. Please keep an eye open, Ishadi. There might be questions coming to you, but we will address that in the panel. And also, I'm reminding participants to send your questions, tag the speakers. We would like to move to the next session for the Mentimeter. This is a very quick, just to test the knowledge, as we had said earlier, this is a learning session. We're going to have a 3-minute Menti exercise. So please, if you could scan the QR code that is on the screen, but also you can click on the link that will be shared via chat. I just want to highlight that, the questions are more related to what Andrew and Ishadi have already spoken about. So we are also testing knowledge. And if you feel that there is new comments that you'd like to address, new inputs from the questions, please feel free to address them. So if we could move to the Menti. I can see already 10 people have connected. I think people, we are 87 in the call plus actually. So let's get to at least 40 participants before we can start. The number is increasing. Fantastic. Good. I think we can move to the first question. So when you think of biodiversity based on the first two keynote presentation, what comes to your mind? Just one word that you think of. Green. Oh, nice. There's a balance with the animals coming in. Degradation. Oh my God. I hope not. I think Andrew made it very clear. We want to ensure that we do not, patch things later. So there are tools that we can avoid the degradation. Culture, I like that. Natural habitats. Most prominent coming in is nature and green. Oh, I see birds. Urban-rural connections, cross-pollination, very nice. Let's keep in mind the different scales that was also presented at the beginning as well. We had, scales of space and time. Maybe we can move to the next question. Just trying to keep time. What do you believe is the biggest benefit of biodiversity for urban health, based on your opinion?
You can choose up to two.
Okay. Improving air and water quality. I think that's the most preferred, improving air and water quality. Of course, the rest of these are still related to urban health. There are still benefits of biodiversity for urban health. But I see majority of the colleagues here are looking at improving air and water. So that relates maybe to respiratory diseases or even issues related to water pollution. Access to green space is also important. I think there's also a link there to mental health as well, apart from the physical health perspective. Can we move to the last question? Which urban health issues do you think is most improved by biodiversity? Reducing pollution-related diseases. Lowering urban temperature, thereby reducing heat-related illness. We know that July this year, one of the days was marked as the highest ever recorded in terms of heat. So heat is becoming a big challenge in cities. But what is popular amongst the participants is really reducing pollution-related diseases, and that links very well to the first question in terms of the benefits. So I think we are seeing, to the second question. So we are seeing a very good interlinkage between the two questions and how improving biodiversity supports reducing pollution-related diseases. I think we have an opportunity for the last question. So let's move to the last question. How well do you think cities currently engage youth in biodiversity and urban health planning? On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 meaning completely, and 1 is not at all. We are not even at 1. Ishadi, what do you think?
No words to say.
I think there's a lot more work that we need to do in terms of engaging young people in biodiversity and health related issues. So I think what we can do is that we can move to the next segment. Thank you very much for everyone who has contributed to this part, I think it's also good to know that we need to work harder in terms of engaging young people. And Ishadi made a very good, description of what young people means up to 35 years of age. So would like to delve into the nexus between biodiversity and health more in depth with two speakers. So our first speaker is Mr. Aruni Bhatnagar. He is a Smith and Lucien Gibson Professor of Medicine and the Chief of the Division of Environmental Medicine. He's also serving as the Director of the Christina Lee Brown Environmental Institute and the American Heart Association's Tobacco Regulation and Addiction Center. In addition, he's a distinguished university scholar. So over to you, Mr. Aruni, who will be looking at the public health challenges and the results from biodiversity loss and how we can, basically address that through biodiversity. So over to you, Aruni.
Thank you, Joy. I'm just going to put this up. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for the invitation and for the interesting session so far. I was very surprised at the word cloud. The word health did not come up between biodiversity.
Yes.
So we have a lot of work to do. But I'm going to talk about green spaces, biodiversity, and human health. And surprisingly, there is a strong connection between biodiversity and health. So we all know that an increase in greenness can benefit the environment and human health. Andrew talked about this and how there was One Health that affects the environment, and green spaces can affect human health, but also has profound social effects, bringing us all together, increasing social cohesion, get people outside their houses, but also direct sort of benefits on the health. At least there is some evidence to suggest that that might be the case. Many studies have shown that people who live near green spaces or live around areas with high surrounding greenness, that is associated with a decrease in all-cause mortality as well as cardiovascular mortality. But mind you, these are only associated studies. People living in green spaces have lots of other positive features. For example, they could be much better off socioeconomically. They're more careful about their health. They have greater access to medical care. But greenness can make a direct impact on mortality, particularly cardiovascular mortality. And this is one study from the United States showing that when you have a loss of ash trees, and this was because of an infestation of a borer in the northern United States, as the infestation killed more and more trees, there was a corresponding increase in the rates of mortality in the community. So, which means that in communities where trees die, people die as well. So there must be some strong link between greenness, biodiversity, and health that we are yet to fully understand. We do know that not only total mortality, but also sort of recovery from trauma and recovery from major illness could be affected by greenness. And this is one study we did for cancer survivors in the United States. It's a study of over 5 million people, over 2.2 million deaths. And what we found was that when people lived in areas that were greener, and this is called NDVI, which is a way of measuring greenness. So if they lived in greenest places, their risk of death was lower than if they lived in less green spaces. And this was particularly true for high survivable cancer, whereas cancers such as lung cancer and pancreatic cancer, which is low survivability, there was a small effect. So what it brings home the idea that living in green spaces could be conducive to your health, prevent adverse events, and when adverse health outcomes happen, they improve recovery. There are a lot of ideas why this might happen. One idea is that this could be because of better mental health, and I think Kathleen's going to talk about that in a few minutes, where there have been reports that people who live in green spaces report better mental health. But one of the key effects of green spaces and biodiversity could be on immunity, because we do know that the human immune system needs to be educated by being exposed to a range of biodiverse exposures. And these different exposures to bacteria and viruses and pollen educate the immune system so that it becomes more resilient and therefore becomes sort of more becomes stronger to withstand any particular environmental insult that might come across the way. And one of the examples of that is from the incidence of asthma. We know that children who live in green spaces have less asthma. So children who grew up in farms and around farm animals who are outside have very low levels of asthma compared to children who actually grew up in cities and live in ultra clean environments. And this is the data showing here about sort of this is about 40,000 individuals and looking at green spaces. So if you live in high green spaces or areas that have high coverage of greenness, that you have at least a 18% reduction in the incidence of asthma. So there is a link between how green your surrounding neighborhood is and the risk of asthma. And the overall idea is that maybe if you lose natural environments, if there is a loss of greenness around the areas that you live in, you are not exposed to the high diversity of microbes, and this causes changes in your immune responses. There is local inflammation. There is actually changes in T cells, which are and changes in cytokines that prevent inflammation, and therefore you get or you become at a higher risk of inflammatory diseases. But what about overall mortality? So this is a study from California showing that if you have greater biodiversity, and in this case, that biodiversity is measured by Shannon index, and you can see the more biodiversity you have, the lower is the risk of heart disease. So for one standard deviation increase in the index, there is about a 13% decrease in the rates of heart disease and a 16% decrease in the rates of stroke. So what this does is brings to our attention the important link between biodiversity and human health. But this is still just a link. We, as I was mentioning, when we live, people who live in green spaces around trees are much economically much better off. They have a better health profile. So to get real evidence, we want to do studies in which we intervene in the sense that we go and increase air greenness in an area and see what happens. And that is precisely what we did in a project in Louisville, which we called the Green Heart Project. And this project is to test the idea that how intervention in an urban environment with increased greenness would affect the health of the community. It's a collaborative project with many different agencies and universities, particularly the National Institutes of Health and the Nature Conservancy. The central hypothesis of our study was that if you are exposed to high levels of greenness, that will decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease by decreasing the levels of air pollution. So to test this, we actually went to a neighborhood, which was a middle to low income neighborhood, had low tree canopy, high levels of traffic, had both black and white residents living next to each other, and that the neighborhood itself wanted to improve its area by increasing the tree canopy. We talked to members of the community for a very long time. We actually contacted over 60 businesses, hundreds of homes. We did door-to-door canvassing, so be able to work in the area. And then what we did was divided the area into two different main blocks. One is called the control block, and then a target block of cluster of neighborhoods. And this target block was where we were targeting to put greenness, whereas no deliberate change in greenness was made in the control. So we can understand what's happening in this area compared to the adjacent control areas. But before we could put any greenness into this area, we needed to know what the conditions there were. So we did a scan of all the trees in the neighborhood. We looked at their health. We did canopy assessment as well as evaluation of the health of the trees that might be there within the neighborhood. We measured air pollution by using 60 fixed site monitors to get a fair idea of how much pollution was in this area. We also did mobile monitoring which is essentially a graduate student going down on a golf cart around the neighborhood. And this is what we found, that most of the air pollution was around major roadways. And this is a major freeway going through the neighborhood. We do have areas within the neighborhood that have levels of pollution that are high. And some of the hot spots we saw were places where there were fast food restaurants that people would idle their cars and therefore spew a lot of pollutants within the neighborhood. So we would know where to plant the trees. And this is a critical point because people plant trees wherever it's possible, wherever they can think that it would make a difference. But this is the first time that we are planting trees in an evidence-based fashion, so that targeting them to the most polluted areas near freeways and major roads. In addition to pollution, we also measured the levels of biodiversity in the area. We did arthropod species, avian species, and butterfly species. And what we found that biodiversity varies with levels of air pollution measured here by NOx. And you could see that as the pollution increases, there's a decrease in the species richness or the Shannon index. As the greenness increases, there is an increase in species richness. So this is not very surprising, but still tells us that there is greenness is associated with more biodiversity, and that pollution is associated with less biodiversity. And the same thing with birds. We can see that there were more birds when there was more greenness and less birds when there was more air pollution. We did cardiovascular exams of the people there every year. We recruit 500 to 700 people. We've done this for 4 consecutive years so that we would have a good evaluation of their blood pressure, of the lipids, of the levels of diabetes and obesity risks they have, inflammation, and so on. We did extensive psychosocial evaluation, and this was to look at anxiety, depression, and well-being, social cohesion within the community. And then we transplanted trees in the community. Now, since we couldn't study the effects of trees that were small for many, many years, we planted some very large trees. And this meant a lot of organizational work, a lot of labor, and a lot of resources to be able to plant very large trees within the neighborhood. But we planted within people's homes, in backyards and front yards, so that we would have a good coverage of the area. We did computer modeling to see how the pollution was spreading into the neighborhood. And as you can see, if there was a haphazard plantation of trees, and this is shown as current condition, we would make things worse compared to no trees. But if we do a design case and we layer the trees from small to big, we could actually ease their pollution. And the design case was really decrease the levels of air pollution. So with this background, we actually got trees from many different states around the United States, and we brought them all to Louisville. We actually had to amend the soil to be able to make sure that our trees grow well. We had a central receiving site, which received all the trees that we distributed. We sort of got the trees to different places where they need to be near people's homes and freeways. We had to spade all these trees in because they're not small trees. And so we started with things like the sound wall like this. And then after everything was done, we got to something like this. So if you notice, here is a sort of a gradient of trees so that we would be able to ease the air pollution out and not trap the bad air in the neighborhood. We planted trees there were within people's homes and in right-of-ways, like I said, in the backyards and front yards, around businesses and homes, so that we will have a large number of trees spread out throughout the neighborhood. And in the end, we got about more than 8,000 large trees planted within the target cluster of neighborhoods. Mostly they were deciduous, mostly evergreen trees with some deciduous trees. And so now that we almost double the number of trees that were there. We planted 42 different species to maintain good biodiversity, and that would sort of cover up a whole range of different families, both in the evergreen families as well as in the deciduous family. Looking at our results, we saw that of the people we recruited, They were almost comparable between the control and treatment areas. What we found was that after putting the trees, we could see a decrease in the levels of a protein, which we call a C-reactive protein. And as you can see that in the control neighborhood, there was some decrease in the level of this protein, but not very much. But in the target neighborhood, there was a large decrease, showing that when we plant trees, you can get a decrease in the levels of CRP, about 20% or 22%, so on. So if we just go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Very interesting presentation, but you do have less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm done. So then we could see that there is a decrease in the levels of CRP upon the after planting trees, the year 1 and year 2. So what do we hope? We hope to create healthier cities for tomorrow. We would think that planting trees has an important effect on human health, but we need to understand that. That's the reason we undertook this experiment, and we hope that other people around the world would actually do similar things to be able to demonstrate and, more importantly, measure and quantify the effect of trees and biodiversity on human health. And maybe in doing so, we'll discover new ways of decreasing the levels of air pollution around the globe, which is there is 7 million premature deaths around the globe with air pollution, the leading killer. And so we need to understand how we should be able to prevent air pollution levels. We would maybe lead to the development of new policies and guidelines and building codes so that we should be able to create healthier cities in the future. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to question and answering session.
Fantastic. You can hear the claps in the room. Thank you very much, Aruni. This was a great presentation, really focusing on evidence and the direct correlation between greening and health outcomes. And we've seen it firsthand that it does have a direct correlation. So and the model that you have presented is something that can be replicated globally. And something that we should take it up as one of the tools. I know there are several tools that have been presented. We hope to consolidate this into a toolkit as well. I do apologize for my background, really, but I would like to introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much, Aruni, for mentioning Catherine's next presentation. Catherine will focus more on the linkage with mental health, but also urban planning strategies. She is a research and social scientist at the University of Washington School of Environment and Forest Sciences. Her experience spans on nature-based human health, as well as environmental health, environmental psychology, urban ecosystem, urban forestry, and urban planning. She's also a researcher with University of Washington's Nature and Health initiatives, focusing on greening schoolyards and urban health. So over to you, Kathleen Wolf.
Joy, thank you so much. I'm going to now share some slides. And screen. And am I there? Are you seeing slides?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. All right. As this has been set up, each of the speakers appears to be time challenged, and I'm one of them as well. So I will be progressing through these slides fairly quickly, leaving some highlights, some ideas that might provoke further discussion as we follow up on the presentations. Let me start. I have 3 main sections here. Let me start with the research about urban nature, nearby nature, and human health. And Dr. Bhatnagar, of course, gave a great overview. I'll add a little more detail to that. My interest in nearby nature and health was really accentuated about 10 years ago when the U.S. Forest Service, United States Forest Service, recruited me to prepare this website called Green Cities Good Health. And it's a broad overview of nature and health in cities. We have not refreshed it, but many have told me that this is still a good catalog, a good introduction and overview across about a dozen topics you see there on the left. So the website, Green Cities Good Health. More recently, I worked with colleagues to do a more formal review, a systematic review of articles about specifically trees in cities and human health. And again, Dr. Rooney gave us a nice overview of some of the highlight studies. So what have we learned across these sorts of reviews? My own work as well as other reviews that have been published. First of all, when we look at causes of death across the world, heart disease, stroke, pulmonary disease, while infectious diseases are still an important health concern across various nations, the chronic disease and multimorbidity issues are ever more prominent and ever more expensive. And what we see across these reviews is that many of these health conditions are, of course, not completely alleviated, but people experience better quality of life, perhaps less severity of these diseases, more extended life cycle or more extended life expectation if they live in places that have more nature and biodiversity. And this literature is now, it totals thousands of studies. I continue to monitor the research. It's across 40 to 50 years now. And this is a flow chart of the outcomes, the exposure elements that are typically evaluated in studies, the response influences, the change, the moderating states of mental states and improved behaviors, and then the consequences, a wide range of health outcomes. And some of these are more, they're better confirmed by way of the quality of science and or the volume of science, the number of studies. And others are really interesting prospects that we can learn more about through research. For instance, healthcare costs. How do we translate these outcomes and findings to those tangible costs and benefits to individuals, to households, to entire cities, perhaps even entire nations? And what we see across this research is there's a wide variety of nature exposures that actually positively influence health, from protection and conservation of intact ecosystems in and around cities to highly engineered and highly built environments, such as some of the more progressive or innovative architectural renderings and constructions that we see. Green schoolyards. So again, with youth, one of the focuses of our presentations today, how do we introduce more nature in the everyday environments of children? And green schoolyards are building momentum across many places, many cities. One of the high-level trends or patterns that we see is if people are well, if they're functioning well, they're happy, life is pleasant for them, having more nature around them promotes that wellness, continues to encourage that wellness. On the other hand, if people are clinically diagnosed with a variety of conditions, be it heart disease, be it diabetes, and mental health concerns, what we see is that nature is ever more being prescribed, or as in the Louisville, the Green Heart Project, created around communities or people's homes, but as a treatment, as a therapy, again, to help alleviate symptoms and perhaps even move a patient to recovery. Another broad pattern that we see are disparities in the distribution of green and trees. And again, that was one of the motivations, to my understanding, for the Green Heart Project. But this disparity dimension is seen across neighborhoods in a single city. It's seen across nations, where some cities are more green than others, and of course across various nations on our planet. In particular, the global South, a greater understanding that there are many cities in the global South not attaining or not having as much green as places in more temperate areas, the north or north temperate areas. So understanding these disparities, often understood through remote sensing, through data derived from satellites, LIDAR, and so on. Another trend we're seeing in the research is to understand dosage. So early studies were associative. That is, you have some sort of green, you have a health outcome of interest. What is the statistical relationship? Now there's ever more work to try to understand how much. What is the character of that space? Is it different for different people? And here is a very high level expression of dosage, and that is, it appears that this research is settling in about 20 to 30 minutes for a session. 5 minutes, some studies are showing up to 5 minutes, or just 5 minutes can have value, but 20 to 30 minutes seems to be important, and understanding not only a single experience of nature, but that it's ongoing, that it's part of your everyday routine and lifestyle, up to about 120 minutes per week. And this can become then a planning goal in how we tactically or strategically start to develop green space systems in order to offer these opportunities for outdoor time. Another trend or pattern that we see across this research is that across all stages and ages of the human life cycle, there is great benefit from nature encounters from the very earliest days of our lives. For instance, studies that are being done have been done showing that baby birth weight, healthier baby birth weight associated with those households where a pregnant woman, a pregnant mom, has more tree cover adjacent or over her home. Then to the later stages of life, adolescence, youth, moving into adulthood, various stages of adulthood. And finally, at the very end of our lives, palliative care, cancer treatment, and including nature. And even now, studies are approaching concerns about dementia and Alzheimer's and how symptoms can be alleviated perhaps by having more nature around the care center. Let me now take you to another pattern, a focus on mental health. I would say in my review of various of the realm of research, that mental health has some of the strongest support in the research by way of both quantity and quality of studies. And the challenges are so great in so many societies, so many places, so many cities. Confusion, anxiety, much of this heightened by the pandemic, but of course, these underlying concerns and dynamics have been going on and escalating for some time. And young people in particular, I'm hearing more and more about concerns of young people and their mental health issues. I have colleagues that are now focusing on university students, high school students, how to introduce more green on campuses, not only introducing more green, but how to encourage young people to be outdoors, to spend more time, and do so in an intentional way. Put aside the device, put aside the phone, and be in a contemplative and restorative opportunity within nature settings. Also, climate, of course, all of the different expressions of climate change, not only increased temperature, but severe weather changes, more typhoons and hurricanes, extreme heat. Some of the other speakers have spoken about that. Recently, United States, extreme flooding associated with hurricanes in the southeast. And with that then is this term from psychology of solastalgia, that people, in addition to the tensions and demands of everyday life, they're feeling this emotional or existential distress associated with environmental change, associated with urbanization, densification, associated with climate-related change. So here are just a few studies addressing the importance of nature experiences to address mental health. Here's a study done by a colleague of mine at the University of Washington, Greg Bratman, finding that when people are outdoors for a prescribed time, that this helps alleviate this term or this condition of rumination, where if we're in a negative thought mode, it tends to spiral downward. We tend to focus on negative thoughts, negative interactions, social interactions, but being outdoors helps us to eliminate or at least to alleviate that condition of rumination, bringing us to better mood, less stress, less anxiety. And various organizations are now incorporating these sorts of activities into their programming or into their special sessions that they might offer for their clients or their visitors, such as strolls for well-being, or introducing programs of strolls at home for people in between their visits to, in this case, a public garden. Another practice that is gaining a lot of attention globally is forest therapy. Next month, well, actually next week, I'll be traveling to South Korea to engage with a group of people who are promoting forest therapy within urban areas. And there's a wide range, very, very rigorous research, demonstrating a wide range of benefits for people of a forest therapy practice within their life, including mental health. And cities and organizations are now starting to recognize that there is a need to intentionally either conserve the places that offer forest therapy opportunity or to create those places, and starting to do inventories to help them understand, can they create systems, nature systems across the city that might then offer the opportunity either for people to informally go out for walks, go out for strolls in nature, or for trained certified guides to offer these sessions for groups of people, either through recreation departments, through hospitals, through healthcare facilities. Now, speaking to biodiversity, really interesting science just coming through as public health and medical investigators are working with ecologists. Here's one study using proxies of tree cover and bird abundance, using these as proxies for measures of biodiversity, finding mental health benefit in those places having more tree cover, less depression, less anxiety, less stress, starting to suggest, knowing this amount of tree cover, starting to suggest policy guidance for how much urban forest cover is optimal or is suggested for human well-being, particularly mental health. Other investigators are starting. Yes.
I'm cutting you short. You do have, apologies for cutting you short. You do have less than 1 minute to wrap up.
Oh my goodness. Okay. As I said, time challenged. There are investigators looking at frameworks to help understand how we introduce green and blue spaces into cities for greater health. They're also exploring the sense of smell. So in addition to the visual, what are the elements of our olfactory environment that might promote mental health? Also exploring sound and noises, categorizing different sounds and exploring their physiological and mental effects as these different types of sounds are more prominent in our outdoor environments. Finally, planning. As we talk about what to do, Cecil Canninendijk is promoting the 3-30-300 rule, 3 trees visible from every home, 30% canopy cover, every household, every person having access to a green space within 300 meters of their home. And we can incorporate all sorts of elements, not only intact ecosystems to achieve biodiversity, but thinking about different planting schemes and how biodiversity can be enhanced within wild, engineered, built, and blended landscapes, to the point where we can think about configuration of nature as it's introduced in our planned environments to promote health on the granular level. And connectivity, just as it's important for various species, it's important for physical activity, one of the greatest contributors to human health. And so wrapping this up, nearby nature, health, various biodiversity influences. This is a recent exploratory science, thinking about the sensory composites that promote health. And biodiversity doesn't always equal native or conserved environments. It can be quite a variety. And at that, I encourage you all to go outside, play in nature, and thank you for the opportunity to present these ideas.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And I encourage the forest therapy as well. As we have seen, it has a lot of mental health benefits. I thank you also for bringing in the link with the strategies for urban planning, the 300-30 rule. I think this is something that should be further, encouraged within cities and in neighborhoods as well. So I would like to say thank you very much. I know that we are running out of time. We started a little bit late. So thank you for all the participants that are still with us. There are some questions that have come in on the chat. Thank you to Dr. Aruni as well as Andrew, who have been answering them. So I would just like to call all the speakers just to go over some of the questions that have not been answered. There are, I would say, 3 questions. We can quickly go through them. Otherwise, if we are not able to answer your questions, participants, we do apologize, and we will be sending the questions to the speakers and integrate it into the package that we will be sending out. So the first question is really around the complex relationship, and this is particularly to Dr. Aruni, asking the complex relationship between increase in green or tree canopy and air pollution. Mark says that there are studies that show no clear linkages between trees and reducing pollution, with some even indicating that more trees can worsen pollution by affecting air circulation. What recommendations would you give to increasing green cover or tree canopy without inadvertently increasing air pollution?
Oh, very good question. There are both reports both ways. Trees can decrease the levels of air pollution, particularly if there are trees that are evergreens, can actually absorb pollutants, and they can all the pollutants can stick on the waxy leaf surfaces. And so they're very good at removing pollution. It's been shown repeatedly in tunnel studies, in other direct measurements. However, it is important to note that there has to be right configuration. If you have street canyons and what we call lollipop trees, they actually accumulate air pollution in the understory and makes things worse. So trees could be effective only in the right configuration and not when they're planted in a haphazard manner, where, as I showed, could actually increase levels of air pollution. Trees can also generate what we call volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. So when you have traffic pollutants, they mix with VOCs and generate ozone. So trees can increase pollution where there are levels of high traffic, but they may decrease pollution where there's less traffic. So it depends upon where the trees are placed, which trees are there, and what is the configuration. And then we can get the proper advantage of trees to remove pollution, but not just sort of an uneducated planting of trees or not based on evidence may actually lead to an increase in pollution.
Thank you for that. So I think a clear strategy before doing tree planting and providing some evidence is quite important prior to doing the implementation of the trees or the green cover. There is another question. I think this question can be addressed to all the speakers. If you have any experiences in investigating the correlation between increasing greening with a reduction in land surface temperature. So I do, maybe we can start with Andrew, and then we can go to Caitlin, and then Aruni, and then Ishadi.
Sorry, Joy. I was thoroughly engrossed in the last bits of the answering questions in the chat. Could you please repeat the verbal question?
Yes, sorry. So, based on your experience, has there been a correlation between increase in greening and the reduction in land surface temperature? I think this was particularly to Aruni, if there was a correlation in the study area that you undertook. But in light of the spotlight assessment, maybe this is something that, Andrew, you could also address in your presentation. Maybe I'll give the last question particularly to Kathleen, and then the last one to Ishadi. So I'll keep the second question to both Andrew and Aruni.
I can start, Andrew. I would just say that there is a definite evidence that trees can decrease temperature, just like with pollution. And we actually measuring temperature. We have 60 monitors around the area measuring temperature effects, and particularly surface temperature. Trees are very good at cooling and surface temperatures, but it depends from tree to tree. Some trees which have higher evaporation rate or transpiration rates are much better at reducing temperatures. There are trees which have sort of a much higher leaf area index and they're much dense are much better than large trees. Surprisingly, medium-sized trees are better than very, very large trees. So so we have to be careful about the species, the nature of the wood. So if there's a very a sort of porous wood which conducts a lot of water, that would cool the area much better than if there are trees which are less conductive. And so we have to look at these different tree characteristics to optimize for our own local ecosystems of how trees could be used to decrease temperature. But there's a wide variation. And again, it needs to be carefully, so there should be careful selection to install trees to optimize their effects in removing temperature or decreasing temperature.
And
Thank you.
I'll
Yes,
respond
Kathleen.
to that. Yeah, I'll respond to that from a psychology perspective, and that is, in many of the instances of this research, there's a difference between the accurate assessment or measurement of a trees and an environmental response and human perception. So, for instance, there are differences between the perception of thermal comfort versus the actual heat reduction, air pollution reduction, benefits, and so on of trees. So what I'm observing, again, looking at this broader range of research, is that where not so long ago, trees and nature, it was just nature is good, trees are good, just, put it out there, plant it. But what studies are starting to explore are the finer grain tactical and strategic introductions of nature and then health response, not unlike the Green Heart Project, which is done on a much larger scale. But so considering both the social response, the perceptual response, as well as that physiological, rather I'm sorry, it's very early in the morning for me. Words aren't coming readily, but the metrics versus the perceptual response. So sorry.
No problem.
Shall I jump in quickly, Joy, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, brain fog. I would say we've been quite inspired by, I have far less a grip on the evidence base than most others in this call, but we as a team were quite inspired by a 2021 meta study that was, I think, sponsored by the NIH that showed in a very broad spectrum way the benefits for increased tree canopy in general for helping with allergic response, cardiovascular conditioning, and psychological well-being. Obviously, that's not true in all places and times for all species and people. The hotspot stoplight was not designed to do this. It's really a larger scale tool that's meant primarily to help prevent destruction at the peri-urban edge, to avoid loss. That said, when we ground truth this in the cities in which we've used it, there were a number of neighborhoods, dense, mature, heavily built up neighborhoods that were frankly quite disappointed that there was no further risk of biodiversity loss there because there wasn't much left. And they were very highly interested in a much finer scale model that could help them determine where to put in street retrofits, which trees would be most appropriate where. And as a result, we are working with funded by the Arch Rockefeller Center and working with the University of Pennsylvania, again, landscape architecture on a street tree atlas that will help define not just tree typologies, but also built neighborhood typologies and help match the appropriate types of trees for the appropriate types of outcomes, especially health and heat outcomes that a neighborhood wants. So stay tuned. Happy to share updates on that later. Thanks. Back to you.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think I'll just ask the last question to Ishadi. There is a very clear, acceptance by the participants that youth participation in biodiversity-related initiatives is important. But oftentimes, most of the, wishes or ideas that come out from youth participation is not really directed into action. So, do you have any, any ideas as to how we can bridge that gap, especially because this impacts the policy-making processes?
Yeah, thank you so much, Joy, for the question. Yes, I think we also have been working very hard, and I would say it's not easy to bring the youth voices to the policy spaces because there's often we see that with the bureaucracy and everything, the voices kind of are diluted in the most of the spaces. But I think we have to keep trying, and in most of the Gibbon chapters are kind of actually winning these days, and we have a lot of cases. As I said that in the previous NBSAPs. In NBSAPs, even youth were not in most of the countries. We see that youth were not youth were not part of the consultations, and they were not consulted. But in these NBSAPs, since we reach out to youth, reach out to the governments, and we kind of try to keep this engagement and we make sure that we keep in touch with them. And then now our chapters have been able to put our inputs to the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan, and also and still we keep trying. Even during the consultations, it's not really very hard to be seen serious that the youth voices are whether the youth voices are taken seriously is an issue even to the date. But still, I think keep trying and keep making sure that we build our capacity, research levels, and everything as well. That's how we can be seen very. We can be. Then I hope that we will be taken seriously more than now in the future.
Thank you. And maybe the scale will improve when we ask about youth engagement in biodiversity again. We are coming to the end of the session. I would just like to ask each speaker to give us one call to action in regards to the nexus between biodiversity and health. And then we move to closing remarks. We do apologize for the lateness. So maybe Kathleen, over to you on one call to action on this nexus.
Yes, my recommendation, and this would be for a city policy, is to not only provide more green or conserve more green, but intentionally introduce biodiversity, intentionally include ecologists, rarely, at least in my experience in North America. So including ecologists to optimize a variety of ecosystem services and ecosystem types.
Thank you. Dr. Aruni?
I would have a call to actually my fellow academics and even the youth to be able to develop more evidence-based of where biodiversity is most beneficial, what types of trees, species, and placement configuration we should work with. There is a lot of unknowns, and there are big, large knowledge gaps. And so we need to consistently work on that, and finally provide good economic estimates for city planners and landscape architects to be able to be convinced how valuable trees are in its ecosystem services.
Thank you. Ishadi?
Yes, my call to action would be to feel the problem, like feel that we have built your emotional capacity, build your emotional intelligence towards nature, because this is very important. I mean, we see a lot of research happening, and there are researchers are trying hard to make things happen also, but still there's a huge gap that we as a world don't understand, don't have the emotional capacity to understand and take these issues seriously. So I would say build your emotional intelligence towards nature is my call to action.
Thank you. And last but not least, Andrew.
Thanks, Joy. I'm going to call for empathy. Someone else said it, but this is something I feel very, very strongly about. We need so much more empathy in this world. That's for people in other places that may not look like us, people in other times, future generations, and indeed other species. We are nature too. We love to talk about invasives, but we almost never consider ourselves as the most invasive species on the planet. We clearly are. With more empathy, I feel fairly optimistic we can become better stewards of this planet and inspire some real solidarity. Thanks. And thanks for all this.
Thank you. But what a great way for my last concluding remarks. This is not the end of the learning series. We do have other learning meetings that are going to happen. So we have a learning series on biodiversity beyond borders, linking it with urban-rural linkages. We also have one on innovation in biodiverse cities. And most importantly, we hope to meet participants and colleagues both at COP29, but also at COP16 and in the World Urban Forum, where we actually have a specific session on empathy and health. So we look forward to hearing more from you, and also we'll be sharing this session with everyone. So with that, thank you for the ones that have stayed until the last minute. We hope it was as insightful for you as it was for us, and we look forward to the next session. Thank you very much to all the speakers and the keynote speakers for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.